The premise of this program start out with is everything illegal? And I would submit that maybe not everything is illegal, but because of the manner in which disparate impact theory and affirmative action has metastasized into areas that I don't think those that had first come up with the concept had anticipated, there's a good argument that almost everything is illegal under disparate impact, or at least cause of action may be brought in ways that people hadn't ordinarily at the outset anticipated. My colleague Gail Harriet, and I think I'm paraphrasing this, once famously said that she'd write a check for, was it $10,000? $10,000 if you could find any policy, practice, test, standard, device that did not have a disparate impact. And that's precisely right. I would challenge anybody to find any type of standard that didn't have a disparate impact on the basis of sex, national origin, race, age, you name it. I saw just recently that Marvel Comics decided to change Thor from a male to a female. And I thought that was interesting. But I also noted that it had a disparate impact on bald black guys. I was very distressed about that because in all other respects, I think I qualify. But disparate impact has gone into areas that in the 1971 Griggs case, I don't think anyone had thought it would be applied to. As you might expect, at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, on a fairly regular basis, we address matters and conduct hearings that either directly or indirectly deal with disparate impact. The last one that indirectly dealt with it was about 1.5 years ago, and it dealt with the EEOC's criminal background check policy. And because I want to address 2, maybe 3 specific examples of disparate impact, why it's probably unlawful, and more importantly, why it's just bad policy. And finally, it's, I would submit, wholly antithetical to Martin Luther King's notion of judging individuals by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, because, again, as Obie indicated, I've been practicing in this area for 35 years in labor and employment, and I don't know how many times I've heard employers, especially when they're faced with an OFCCP desk audit, say, what do I need to do to get my numbers right? They are concerned about making widgets, not about the racial, sexual, national origin composition of their workforce. If their workforce is a good workforce, if they can make widgets, then in the main, they want to hire those individuals. This is not to say that discrimination has been eradicated, but there are vehicles to deal with that, and disparate impact is a very ham-handed and inefficient way, in addition to being an unlawful way, in my estimation in many respects, of doing so. Especially when dealing with the EEOC's criminal background check policy, it takes away the types of indices, the tests, the standards, the mechanisms by which an employer may judge character, as opposed to merely the color of someone's skin. This originated in the main, famously with Griggs versus Duke Power. And for those of you who have gone to law school, you remember that case in which a facially neutral policy, was applied. And I'll go into it in just a moment, just so we can kind of get the universe in which we're operating. You remember that Griggs, Duke Power Company, had applied a standard of a high school diploma as a prerequisite for entry into certain positions. Well, of course, that standard or requisite of a high school diploma had a disparate impact on black employees, and there was no evidence prior to that time that a high school diploma was important in being able to discharge the functions of the job in question. It was clear that this was being used as a device to engage in disparate treatment, despite the fact that it was a facially neutral policy. There was it was abundantly clear that the intent was to discriminate on the basis of race. It didn't have a job relatedness component to it at all. You could do the job just as well regardless of whether or not you had a high school diploma, but it was implemented only after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and the company needed to make sure that its facially discriminatory policies were eradicated, but this gave them a vehicle by which they could still obtain the same result of discrimination, intentional discrimination. Now, I think that using disparate impact as a tool to discern whether or not an employer or some other bad actor has engaged in disparate treatment is perfectly okay, especially in complex cases. And I wouldn't say in every case, but we have evidence, rules of evidence that permit the adducing of things such as statistical evidence related to the composition of a workforce to provide for the finder of fact some reference point so they can make a determination as to whether or not this particular actor did engage in disparate treatment. But when the means actually become the ends, then we have a problem, because employers and others then try to comport their numbers to satisfy whoever it is who's out there that needs to be satisfied, whether it's the OFCCP or someone else, so that they don't get hit with a ruinous lawsuit. And for many employers, they can't afford the lawsuit. They'd much rather try to jigger their workforce so that it will please their overseers than have to deal with paying the bald guy hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, in order to defend them against a lawsuit.